Okay, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I just want to first thank you all for joining us for the obsessive compulsive disorder event, or the OCD and Me event. I'm Embry Thompson, and I'm the Director of Community Services for Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. And just to give a little bit of background about HAMH, we're a group of individuals who are committed to raising awareness of mental health among Harvard alumni and increasing access to mental health globally. We are a professional network that aims to support mental health of our members, and this event in particular is part of our advocacy speaker series, where we hope to empower personal narratives by inviting members of our community to share their experience in a welcoming, safe, and positive setting, and lower the stigma of talking about mental health. And so with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Adithi Jayaraman, who is one of our own board members at HAMH. And so just to give a little bit of background about our speaker, Adithi, she is currently a junior at Dartmouth College, where she's studying psychology, neuroscience, and anthropology. In addition to being a board member at HAMH, she is also a research assistant at Dartmouth's Psychological and Brain Sciences Department. She's currently working on a study that is investigating whether and to what degree memory impacts perception. And in 2013, she and her sister founded EdGift, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering young women in India and the US to become leaders in their communities. Adithi's experiences working with these young women furthered her passion for service, propelling her to engage in other service opportunities like HAMH. So thank you so much, Adithi, for being here. We're really excited to have you. And so now that we've introduced you, I'd just like to get us started by asking you if you can speak a little bit about the beginning of your journey and your diagnosis with obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, so I pretty much had symptoms throughout my entire life, but we didn't really address them. I kind of pushed it under the rug and dealt with them through compulsions. But I got diagnosed March 2021, so 2 springs ago. And that was the spring of my freshman year in college. So I was at Dartmouth. And a specific trigger happened while I was in a Zoom meeting. And that is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, to say. And that's what led me to take a medical leave from school and get the help I needed. So throughout life, I've had the symptoms, but the symptoms, of course, like many different mental illnesses, got really aggravated during my adolescence years. So in high school, like senior year, junior year, I really saw it, increasingly getting disabling in terms of my life. But it was really that trigger, that one moment freshman year, that really just allowed me to get help and broke the camel's back. But honestly, looking back, I would not trade that moment for anything, because that's really what allowed me to get the help I needed, that I needed for years, but just never really addressed it or acknowledged it. So yeah, that's when I was diagnosed officially. Yeah, I had symptoms before. And then after that diagnosis, I immediately went to a therapist. My parents helped me find a therapist who specializes in OCD, and I've been with him since March 2021. And I also went to see a psychiatrist. And I've also been with her since March 2021.
Thanks for sharing. And so you mentioned that even before you received an official diagnosis, you were noticing some symptoms before. And I'm wondering if you could discuss a bit what that looks like for you, and who you initially spoke to about this, and how did you approach someone about like what you were feeling or experiencing?
Yeah. So for me, OCD transpired in many ways, multiple ways. So for some people, OCD is in this one particular theme. For others, it, depending on the stage of life you're in, it caters towards the obstacles that you're facing in that life. So when I was little meaning like elementary school, of course, I didn't have too many academic stressors. So my OCD was more so, and I was a swimmer at the time. I was a competitive swimmer, and swimming was pretty much the big bulk of my time. And I remember like every day, if I didn't sleep until I'd sleep by like 9 p.m. I would throw a fit. I would get anxious. I had this obsession with time. If I didn't get to practice like 10 minutes before, I would cry in the car. There was this one instance where we had a meet in Rutgers University and we were running late and I started having a fit in the car. And my mom's like, okay, you don't have to swim then. You don't have to swim if you're having a fit. And I really wanted to swim, but I couldn't hold back the tears because I couldn't like comprehend the fact that I'm going to be late. I'm going to miss the practice session and I'm not going to be like warmed up to swim. So that was one of the major symptoms I saw, like time, in terms of just having to be on time, not even just on time, but early to everything I did. And then another one was touch. So this was not as big of a symptom as my other ones, but I think when I was in elementary school as well, I just hated the feeling of pants on my waist, or like just hated the feeling. And I didn't want, of course, I had to wear pants, but I would just wear dresses, or, you know, because I just hated that feeling. And I became very obsessive about it. And I felt like it was constricting me in some way. But again, as you age and as different obstacles come about, they start to fade away and new things happen. But one symptom or one kind of strain of OCD that I've had my entire life is perfectionism, specifically in regards to academics. And this is something that many people can relate to, especially, you know, college students. Like I was always a high achieving person. I always had extremely high standards set for myself. Like forget about my parents. My parents, you know, they used to joke that they would always say like, I want you to get a C. I want you to fail a class so you know it's not the end of the world. So all the pressure was self-induced. And I think the fact that my parents actually placed no pressure on me gave me more of an excuse to put more pressure on myself. And I, even as a little kid in elementary school, I would cry over getting like 97s because I did not get the 100. And this, you know, continued on into middle school. And I actually, like during 8th grade Shakespeare test, I blacked out. I passed out because I was so nervous because one section of the test was matching the quote to the character and I did not know the first question. And I, you know, went into a panic attack and I passed out on the floor. And that was definitely a very scary moment for my family. And you'd think that'd be a wake-up call. And I think for 3 months after that, I was like aware that like you're really physically hurting yourself. The stress is actually placing a physical burden upon yourself. But then once I got into high school and I was seeing that I can get A's, like, because in regards to my work ethic allows me to get the grades I want, but my work ethic is not healthy. And I didn't think I could get the grades I wanted without this unhealthy work ethic. So I, you know, pushed myself. I would wake up at 5 a.m., study. You know, I did everything. I would go into office hours like nonstop. The professors probably thought I was crazy. And literally, like, high school, I got everything I wanted. I got the grades I wanted. I got into the school I wanted to get into. So it was just this constant conditional reinforcement, you know, like, oh, okay, so you have to keep on pushing yourself, hurting yourself in order to get what you want. And then college hit and, you know, I got the grades I wanted freshman year, but again, I was not, you know, utilizing the right work ethic. And then that thing happened in a Zoom meeting that really caused me to reassess things. So yeah, it's transpired throughout my entire life, taken on different hats, different disguises. But yeah, I mean, for all I know, it's probably going to take on a different disguise as I grow older and as I face new obstacles.
Thank you so much for sharing that really like detailed description of like the things that you were experiencing. I'm curious about like, were the physical manifestations of stress the thing that drove you to think more critically about what was happening? Or were you already thinking of that like when you would feel the immense stress, but like, was it when you were like, when you passed out during a test that was really like drawing your attention to this, or was your attention drawn to it before those kind of manifestations?
Yeah, I think the physical like manifestations of my OCD only got fairly aggressive in middle school and high school, and of course freshman year. I think I'm really lucky to like have really good physical health, so I never really paid attention to my physical health. It was always just mental health for me. But I got used to it. And that's kind of the scary and dangerous part about mental health. Like you can habituate to that physical feeling of holding like 100 pounds of weight on your shoulders so easily. I got used to it. I got used to that tight feeling in my chest. I got used to waking up in the night, like in panic attacks. I got used to sweating a lot right before a test. I got used to getting headaches because I would worry too much and go into a rumination cycle. I got used to it. And I thought that was, the norm. And it's very easy to habituate to it. And I was catering my life towards this. I thought this was going to be my life. So I made sure, I adapted to it and I did what I could to deal with what was happening in my mind and the effect it was having in my body. But yeah, I think I only really became aware of it in middle school and I habituated to it in high school and college.
Okay. And so kind of segueing into the diagnosis part, when you mentioned that, living with these symptoms for a long time, you can kind of habituate to that becomes your default, your norm. And so you don't really notice like that it might be signaling something more serious. And so I'm wondering, like, once you did receive the diagnosis, how did you, and also if you want to speak on how your family also received the diagnosis, like, what was that time like, and like, how did you think about that diagnosis?
Yeah, I think so. I got diagnosed March 2021. And that was right after I had this very explosive panic attack at school. My parents rushed and took me home. And I was always very transparent with my parents. Like throughout all the years, I would tell them about these worries. We called them my little worries. And my parents tried their best to help me deal with it. Later, we realized that they were just compulsions, but we did what we could in the moment and what we thought was best in the moment. So I never really hid anything from my parents in terms of the extent of what I was going through internally. So they were always aware of what thoughts I had, the themes of the thoughts, the types of thoughts, the degrees of worry. And I think when I had that panic attack, my parents already knew the patterns. And actually, my dad was like predicting my diagnosis before I even saw a therapist, and he got it right. So it was very obvious through my symptoms. But everyone has obsessions and compulsions. It's just whether it disables your life, and that is a very subjective, gray line to draw. So I think throughout my life, we just thought, oh, well, she's still high functioning. She's still doing all this, she's getting the grade, she's socializing, she'll be fine. But it just, of course, it didn't end that way. But I think I'm really grateful for that. So yeah, my dad predicted the diagnosis actually. And then we went to the therapist. He told us, and at the moment I had HARM OCD. So there's many types of OCD. I talked about like perfectionist OCD. I talked about like time as an obsession. And that moment I had HARM OCD, which is the fear of hurting people. And that was particularly triggered by specific events in high school. And again, that tends to be the pattern with a lot of OCD. OCD kind of hooks onto one particular traumatic event in your life and tends to stretch it out and apply it to you in irrational ways. So I had a HARM OCD starting in high school and then continuing to college. There were certain events in college that just aggravated it. And yeah, so he diagnosed me, the therapist diagnosed me with HARM OCD. And I just bring that up specifically HARM OCD because I know in popular media and common culture, it's very easy to think OCD is, people use it very colloquially, like, oh yeah, it's just my OCD when they're like regarding like organization or like cleaning your hands or germs. And I will admit, like I used it before I was diagnosed as well. Like I would say that. But I think after experiencing the true tribulations and struggles of OCD, it pains me when I hear people say that, whether it's in school or whether it's in popular culture, because there's so much more to OCD. OCD is not just regarding cleaning and germs. I don't have that. You can come into my room and you'll see I don't have that cleaning germophobia kind of idea. OCD takes on major different themes. And it's also, it's not a fun experience. So using it colloquially to refer to like your need to organize or your need to like be clean does definitely, impact people who actually experience OCD. So I just wanted to mention that because that's something I only realized after, I really experienced the dark periods of OCD. So, but yeah, that's how I was diagnosed. And then in terms of how it affected me and my family, I think for me personally, it was reassuring to know that I wasn't crazy. Um, I thought I was irrational. I thought I was crazy for the longest time. It would take me hours to open up to my parents, and they'd be like, just tell me, just tell me. And I didn't want to tell them my irrational thought because I thought they would see me as like a dangerous person or as this like crazy person. Um, so even opening up to a therapist, like someone that's not related to me, that was extremely hard. But then once I opened up, my therapist like didn't judge me at all. And he's like, yeah, I've seen this before and I did research on it. And literally there's so many people who have this. And it's just really reassuring and refreshing to know that like, this is just not something I made up in my head. It's not just me being crazy. It's a clinical condition. It's something to do with the neurotransmitters in my brain. It's not me. And yeah, it was really reassuring. And I think it was also very reassuring for my family because, you know, at least once you have a diagnosis, you have a treatment. So I think that was, you know, we had a path forward. Maybe it wasn't entirely clear, but we had a path forward as opposed to before when we just were doing what we could in the moment to satisfy my worries. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I really liked what you said about, mentioning how sometimes people can um, use the term like, oh, I have like OCD sometimes when that's really not what it is that they're talking about. And how sometimes it can give off a reductive kind of attitude towards people who actually do suffer from OCD or live with OCD. Um, and I think one of the really important parts of this series is that it also teaches our audience about how we can also change our behaviors, and share spaces with others who do live with these conditions and do so in a way that's not causing them any further like harm or offense. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I'm also glad that you brought up how helpful it is to see a therapist and how um, it can reduce those feelings of isolation to know that other people also, or many people, are experiencing what you experience and that you're not some, a lone statistic. Um, it's something that does occur within society. So thank you so much for sharing that. I am also thinking about how you mentioned that you were diagnosed in college in 2021. Am I right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think of college as a time that's kind of a transition from childhood to adulthood, and it's like maybe one of the first times in your life when you're not with your parents anymore. And I'm wondering how you were how your coping strategies changed like once you left home, because I know you spoke about talking to your parents and opening up to them about some of the thoughts that you were having or some of the patterns of behavior that you were seeing, and once you left them during college, maybe like how did your coping strategies change then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think looking back, freshman 2020. So I came into college during COVID. So my freshman year, it was all virtual, but we were still in our dorms. And we were just kind of restricted to our dorms in certain locations on campus. So in terms of the coping strategies and the fact that I was physically like 5.5 hours away from my parents, it was definitely a struggle at first. But being the perfectionist I am, I really wanted to, prove to them that I can be on my own. I can, have a successful freshman fall. So I honestly didn't reach out as much. And unfortunately, looking back, I wish I did because that's when my symptoms got increasingly bad, in terms of, like on Zoom meetings or, with COVID, we're like fearing that I would give COVID to someone, or just in terms of like the different triggers. There were so many new triggers around me, at least in high school and at home, I can control it. And I was used to it. But now I was in this completely new environment. So yeah, I definitely, in terms of coping strategies, I didn't deal with it very well. instead, I turned to compulsions, which, as anyone with OCD knows, provides temporary relief, but it really does set you back in terms of your long-term happiness. So I survived freshman fall through compulsions. And, I was recording stuff. I would check things not like incessantly. And that it's a major characteristic of OCD, just doubting yourself and keep on checking. And it was exhausting. I wouldn't go to certain locations on campus because I was afraid that my OCD would act up there. I would record certain things to make sure I didn't do anything. I would not sleep some nights because I feared that I would do something while I was sleeping. So there were some really, really, really tough days, but I dealt with it through compulsions. And yes, the compulsions allowed me to get through freshman fall, but it really did hurt me in the long run in terms of, I could have gotten help earlier. But yeah, so I didn't really use the proper coping strategies. I used compulsions, but yeah, that's something looking back in hindsight, I wish I, recognized it. But yeah, that was when it was, rapidly getting worse during freshman, fall, and winter until it kind of exploded in the spring.
And I'm also thinking of your, college experience as a time when you're building a lot of new relationships with people, and building friendships and such. And I'm wondering what it was like for you, maybe if you did at all, like share with friends, like, oh, like sometimes like I might have these thoughts or might have these behaviors, and what maybe explaining to your community might have looked like.
Yeah, freshman year, freshman spring when I went on medical leave, I didn't tell anyone. Pretty much the only people who knew were my parents, my sister, and my therapist. And I was, in all honesty, I was kind of ashamed. I felt very incompetent. I couldn't function. I was sleeping like almost like 16 hours every day because I was just so exhausted. I just couldn't do anything. And I didn't want people to see me as that because I was used to being that high functioning, top of her class student who did everything and anything possible. I didn't want to ruin that reputation. So I hid it. I didn't tell anyone. And then once I got help and, I went through several more hurdles and, overcame that, and it came back sophomore year, I started to open up about it. And I told some of my close friends. And then this past year, I opened up more after having, several things that have happened in my school. I wanted to turn my experience into something that could help people and benefit people. Like I experienced something I would never wish upon anyone. And so I joined the Mental Health Union at Dartmouth, which is an amazing club and organization. And I found my community there. And actually, I think this is probably pretty common for people with mental illnesses, but a lot of my friends also have mental illnesses. And like, I met literally 2 people who have harm OCD at Dartmouth, like unintentionally. One girl, I just, she was crying in the library, and I just like went up to like see if she's okay. And she was telling me stuff. And I was like, wow, I think those same things. And then she's like, yeah, I have harm OCD. I was like, whoa, it was crazy. And I was just so excited to tell my parents. I'm like, it was such a relief because I wasn't the only one, even though I know I'm not the only one, but sometimes you need that tangible evidence. And then one of the girls I met in the summer, like I was just having dinner with her, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh wait, I took medical leave that same term. Wait, what do you have? And then we both have harm OCD. So it was just weird bonding over experiences and how COVID impacted it. Never would have suspected that she would have it. And I think that's something, one main takeaway from this is, mental health is invisible, and we all know that. You can read that, but it truly, truly, truly is something that you can never tell from someone. You can't. No one would have thought that of me. No one would have thought that I took a medical leave. No one would have thought that, I had to pull out of classes. No one would have thought that because of the front that I portray. And I think realizing that, I've been trying to take that mask off these past year and, be open with all the friends I'm making and the people and the relationships. And my mental health, if anything, my mental illness has helped me make friends. If anything, it has never hurt me, even freshman year. It has never hurt me in terms of relationships or maintaining relationships. If anything, it's brought me closer to people, and it's allowed me to have more intimate relationships with people, and the campus as a whole. So if anything, I'm grateful for my mental illness, because, it provides me perspective that I can utilize to understand people better, and also help people. And I think that's, again, no one should ever have to experience any of the tribulations of mental illness. And if I can do something with this dark period of my life to help someone, I would do anything. So that's, in terms of social relationships, it definitely didn't hinder anything.
I just saw Marie Christine clapping, and I just wanted to also just applaud you, because that I feel like you really took a lot of, you really are able to see the joys of being able to, find a community and, alleviate those feelings of isolation. And I'm also really glad that you were able to find friends. And I feel like even in my own experiences, like randomly talking to someone else and finding out that they have a similar experience to you can literally change your day, your life, your week. So I'm really happy that that is something that you found. And so I'm also wondering about your life now as a college student, after having received the diagnosis. And I know that you are still like a very high achieving student. And I'm wondering how you balance your diagnosis with also just continuing to be like high achieving, but not, letting it consume you. How does that feel for you, and like kind of distinguishing the two?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been diagnosed for around almost coming up of 2 years. And I think having been diagnosed in college has helped me more like kind of adapt my life with OCD to college, specifically Dartmouth. And to be honest, it was very hard at first. My family and I went through so many obstacles, and just in terms of being a college student and having this, diagnosis in your life. But right now, I would say I'm at an all-time high in terms of my college life, my college experience. We just finished the fall term a week ago, and I was just looking back, and I was just so like, just, it was so refreshing. I've never had a term like that where my OCD was pretty much handled. Of course, I had intrusive thoughts here and there. And that's the thing with mental illness. It doesn't go away permanently, unfortunately. It's going to be there. It's going to be here in my life forever until I die. And I'm accepting of that. But now I have the ability and the tools to respond to it properly and appropriately, so that it doesn't disable me like it has in the past. But yeah, being a college student now, it's not the easiest, of course. There's some days this past term, there was like, 3 straight days where I had this worry, and, I was trying to deal with it, and, I had a test coming up, and I was just like stressed out that my worry would distract me on the test and I wouldn't do well in the test. But I got over it. I used my strategies and I leaned into it, and I got over it. But being a college student having mental illness it's no fun. It's not a walk in the park. It's extremely demanding. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I tell a lot of my friends who are experiencing it and who are going through this stuff, because I was in it, and I did not think it was going to get better. I was ready to adapt my life to this, low quality of life where I would have to like do compulsions every minute. I was ready. And was I happy to live that life? No. But once I got the help, and it takes time, takes lots of time and patience and more obstacles. But once I got the help and once I did the work, I cannot stress how amazing my life has been thus far. I think I'm at the highest quality of my life right now. And I'm enjoying college to its fullest. The relationships I've made, the friends I've made at Dartmouth, I wouldn't trade for the world. And in terms of how I'm coping with my OCD, my OCD, in fact, is, as I aforementioned, it's helping me make relationships, if anything. But yeah, it's, and there's so many resources on college campuses, specifically Dartmouth with the mental health union. So I'm always willing to utilize those resources. But, knowing myself and having dealt with this for, my whole life, I know how to deal with it now. So some days, like I just stay in my dorm and look for an hour, meditate, take deep breaths, and like remind myself of my strategies. And I go out into the library and I do my work, and I try my best to let go of the thought. Some days are harder than others. Some days are super easy. I can go 10 days without intrusive thought, which is like amazing if you saw me last year at this time. So it's not easy, but it's not the most difficult thing if you use your resources and you just find that patience within yourself and you have hope, because it's always possible. Just speaking from experience, it's so possible even when you don't think it is. There's always help and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah.
Thank you, Adithi. I'm so sure that your messages today are definitely like resonating with people who are here now, watching asynchronously. Like, I'm really grateful that you're able to share the highlights of your journey, and to give people a sense of hope who might also feel a bit of maybe despair, before they see that, light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And I'm glad that you've gotten there yourself, and you're able to use your tools and your strategies. And speaking of those tools and strategies, I think a couple of audience members and also myself are wondering maybe if you could share some of the tools that work for you. I don't want to like ask in a way that seems like you're giving advice to others, because we know that there are different forms of OCD and they can manifest differently. But just speaking for yourself, maybe what has worked for you?
The strategies I've used in the course of my experience. First, I of course found a therapist who worked with me. This therapist, he specializes in HAMH, so he knew my symptoms, he knew how to work with it. In terms of the specific strategies I used and my experience with therapy, this was the first time I ever went to a therapist. First time anyone in my family has ever been to a therapist, so it was definitely a new experience. And to be honest, I hated it at first. I blamed my parents. I would cry after every session. I would be like, why did you send me here? I was so much better on my own. Of course, on my own, I was doing the compulsions, but I would cry so much. And with OCD specifically, my experience with OCD, there's a treatment called exposure therapy. It's a subset of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So I was doing CBT, and specifically, I was doing exposure response therapy. And what this is about, it's basically you expose someone to their fears in gradations. So not fully out, because of course, you never put someone in cold turkey, but through different degrees. So he first started by asking you to text something mean to someone, and then looking at some news articles, and then we would have imaginals. Imaginals is when you yourself create a situation that you're afraid of, and you listen to it like 30 times consecutively. So I would do those things, and throughout the treatment, I would get so mad at my therapist. I genuinely just strongly disliked him. I was like, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. You're hurting me. I feel like I'm getting worse. I should still be in school. And again, I really thought I was going down the wrong direction, because I felt like I was getting worse, because new intrusive thoughts are happening, were occurring in my brain that weren't occurring before. But in hindsight, of course, everything's better in hindsight. But looking back on it, I had to go down in order to go up. And that's I don't know, I can't speak to other forms of OCD or other mental illnesses, but for my treatment, that's what my therapist told me in the beginning. Of course, I didn't listen to him, but he said, it's going to be hard in the beginning. You're going to feel like you're getting worse. It's you're ripping the Band-Aid off. You're no longer using those compulsions that I survived off of my whole life. And it was extremely scary. And my parents can attest to all of the crying fits I had, and my refusal to go to therapy. And I just, strongly disliked him, the therapist. But then I would say towards the summer of my freshman year, it started getting better. So I started going up a little. And I started, I resumed classes, and I was still doing the exposures. And it was getting better. It was getting much, much, much better. And then throughout, and then winter of sophomore year, it definitely went down more, but then it went up. So my journey was definitely not linear by no means. It was a roller coaster of sorts. And I think I was expecting it to be linear when I first started, and that was super frustrating to me as a perfectionist. You know, I always had this timer, kind of imaginal timer in my mind. I'm like, okay, like I need to get better because I need to get back to school. Because if I don't get back to school, I won't graduate college. And then if I don't graduate college, oh God, what does that mean? Like I didn't even want to entertain that thought. So I definitely put added pressure on myself to get better, and that really wasn't effective by no means. And then when I took a step back and realized, you know, what is the goal here? And at the end of the day, I just want to be happy. And what do I have to do to be happy? So that was my treatment. It was a linear, it was the opposite of linear, it was alinear. And then in terms of my winter of my sophomore year, I had another panic attack because my OCD took on a different form. And so from then on, we did therapy, but I also was on medication. So SSRIs, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And basically what that does, it prevents the reuptake of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in your brain. And of course, if we still don't really understand the neuroscience of mental illness, specifically OCD, but some people think it's a lack of neurotransmitters. So I went on medication spring of my sophomore year. It was a very hard decision for my family and I. Like, no one's been on medication. I didn't want something controlling my brain. There were so many side effects to the medication, like weight gain and other stuff I just did not want to risk. So I was, I had the option of going medication freshman year, but I said no. And in hindsight, I wish I said yes earlier because it's been tremendously helpful. There's a stigma around people taking medications and seeing a therapist and going to psychiatrists, but like it's, and I was part of that force of stigma. I stigmatized it too. And I really, really want to tell people it's just like taking Advil or taking something for your blood pressure or taking something for your liver. And it's a shame that people stigmatize it like that because medicine can, do worlds of benefits for you. Of course, you need a therapy in conjunction with the medicine. The medicine itself won't work and help you, but you need it to help you do the therapy properly. But after that, I still remember it takes 6 weeks for the medication to kick in. And on the 6th week, exactly, I had a computer science test the next day. Usually, I'm having like a panic attack. I'm getting really nervous. I'm like obsessing about stuff. I remember sitting in the car and I was like telling my dad, I'm like, it's kind of weird. I feel like I'm having an out of body experience where like I just wasn't anxious at all. Like my body felt so weird. I wasn't like studying as much as I was. I felt like I was a new person. And my dad's like, well, welcome to what it feels like to be a normal human being, normal level anxiety. And that was the first time I distinctly remember where I could just fully take a deep breath and relax. And looking back, it's kind of sad that I was living life with this high level anxiety and, didn't really realize that the average person isn't experiencing that much. But now after having those medications and doing CBT and doing exposure therapy, I'm slowly getting to that normal level of, the average amount of anxiety a human should be experiencing. So yeah, that was my journey. Therapy, medication. And right now, I see my therapist like once every 3 weeks. So I'm slowly starting to cut that down. And then I still am on medications. But yeah, that's pretty much my journey thus far. For all we know, could change in the coming months. But yeah, those are the two kind of components of my treatment.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know that can be very sensitive, intimate information, but I'm grateful that you were willing to share that with us and in such detail. And I also just want to commend you on your level of patience, especially as a young person. I feel like that's definitely a muscle that you have to build over a lifetime. And I feel like you've managed to, I don't want to say master it, but kind of master it. And I'm really curious about if maybe there's someone in the audience who is, you mentioned how your journey has not been linear and sometimes you hit valleys or hit dips where you thought oh, I'm getting worse, or how am I ever going to get better? What were things you told yourself to keep going and to, be patient and wait until you hit the uptick in your journey?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the main motivators was getting back to college. In all honesty, during the period when I was away, I was on medical leave. I lost a lot of friends. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was essentially kind of turning into a 50-year-old. I was going on morning walks with my mom. And it was not a great time in terms of just like friendships and social relationships. Of course, the friends that, really were true friends stood by me and, FaceTime me, etc. But I was missing out. I kind of had that FOMO where, my high school friends would come back from college and they would talk about their experiences and all that. And I'd be like, yeah, I just sat in my house all day. And, of course, I wouldn't trade that period of time for anything because I got tremendously closer to my parents. And I got to experience so many cool things. I got to take courses that I never would have taken at Dartmouth. So it was amazing. But social wise, like friend wise, it was definitely a little dampered my, social experience. So I think what was motivating me the most and to have that patience is, like you can get back to your friends, you can get back to that, that social life that you love so much in college. And I think also what was really motivating me was just, I would have, few days as I was getting better, like a few hours where there would be no intrusive thoughts, nothing. And I would just feel like I was on like cloud nine or something. I would just be so thrilled. I'm like, wow, this is what it feels like. And of course, an intrusive thought would come again. But having experienced those few minutes of just like absolutely no intrusive thoughts, I wanted that so badly. It was like candy, like, just like, a parent giving a little child candy and then taking it away. So, I felt that and I wanted to experience that 24/7. So that was really my main motivator to get better, really, because at the end of the day, all we ever want is to be happy and to find that deep happiness within us. And I think that's what my mental health journey really taught me. It forced me to reassess my life, what I really want in life. It doesn't matter if I get A's, it doesn't matter if I finish top of my class, because at the end of the day, I wasn't happy. I was struggling a lot. My high school friends probably, are like, wow, Adithi's this perfect golden girl. But internally, it was the opposite. So I realized, like, what in life does make me happy? How do I define success? And, you know, what is my priority right now? It's be happy. So that means I have to work on my mental health, because at the end of the day, you can be the CEO of the biggest company in the world, but if your mental health is not, treated and not acknowledged, it doesn't matter how many successes you have in life, how much money you make, what college you go to, etc. So that really helped me as I transitioned back to college, because now I don't put the same amount of pressure, you know, on me to get the grades I want. I don't put the same amount of pressure to get that internship I want. Instead, I value the relationships I make and the friendships I've made. And to be honest, that has transformed my college experience like hundredfolds. I just like every day I think about three things I'm grateful for. Um, and the three things I'm always grateful for are the relationships I've made, having dinner with that person, cracking that joke with that person, or, just seeing someone in a library and just having this 10-minute conversation with them about the most random topic. It's never like, oh, I got that A on that test, or, oh, like I impressed this professor. It's never that. It never was that. So I think just reassessing and re-acknowledging and just reminding yourself what truly does make you happy at the end of the day and pursuing that is something that I am still very much working on. But yeah.
You end on such a casual note, but I'm sitting here like in awe. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're so proud of you. And there are some comments in the chat that would also echo those thoughts. I'm also wondering, like, was I ever this wise in college? And I don't think so. So like you're really such an inspiration. And I mean, I was taking mental notes of like things that you were saying. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the things that the world tells you you should want and that you should pursue. And I think you've really, gotten a lot of clarity through your journey about what's really important and what you value. And I think that's really all there is to life. It's just learning about yourself, learning about your wants, learning what makes you happy. And I'm so glad that you were able to share at such a young age, like something that it takes a lifetime to figure out.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much for being here, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I do want to leave the last 10 minutes of the event to open the floor to questions or comments. But yeah, thank you so much, Adithi. Like, this was really inspiring.
No, thank you for having me. It was definitely very meaningful for me myself to share and reflect upon my couple past years. So thank you.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions for Adithi, feel free to unmute yourself or send a message in the chat. And feel free to message the chat or message your question directly to me if you'd like to remain anonymous. Yeah. So I think there's a question in the chat from Jay Park. So this is a general question about treatments, but they've asked, generally, can medication be reduced or even eliminated over time? So just want to preface the answer by saying that, well, the event is for, speaking about personal experiences, but if you have any insight, Adithi, feel free to share.
Yeah, of course, like I'm not a clinician, have any medical background, but for me personally, because that's the only thing I can speak from, I think when I was discussing medication options, you do, at least from my case, which is a very specific case, you do reduce it over time. Yeah, so I guess but I'm pretty sure it depends on the person and their specific condition, and the specific progress of their mental health journey. Because again, as we all know, it's very ambiguous and uncertain. So, but yeah, I do believe, for me personally, I will start to reduce it. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the audience or comments? Comments of praise. There are a lot of them in the chat right now. Oh, there's one question. Can you recommend any good resources for learning about OCD?
Yeah, I think for me, the main resources I used, of course, my therapist. And I'm so beyond lucky to have parents who did the research for me, and helped me understand it. But in terms of other resources, there's the NIH, they have, official websites for each mental illness that I definitely refer to. There's also several blogs that people have used. I was just reading one earlier today by a college student who, was talking about who's actually the same year as me, who's talking about her experience living, being a college student with OCD. So honestly, a quick Google search, of course, use reliable resources. But also I found that being transparent about my experience, and again, transparency is a personal decision. And I wasn't always transparent, I was very closed up, in the beginning, but I believe as I've become more transparent, I've found more resources in people. My closest friends at Dartmouth have been such amazing resources in terms of my OCD and my mental health. And they wouldn't be if I never opened up to them. So if you are comfortable, honestly, transparency, to people you trust, of course, can go a long way. But yeah, Google search, OCD, and use reliable resources. But that was something that was really, really, really helpful for me. There's also a lot of, with CBT and exposure therapy, there's a lot of resources, like credible resources that have been created that my therapist has shared with me. So definitely like just Google search resources, and make sure it's, has the credentials and etc. But the internet is filled with so many resources. But yeah, and this is I guess is a plug, but Dartmouth's Mental Health Union has a blog called Mind the Gap, where students write about their experiences with mental health in college. So I strongly recommend reading those. They're really honest, and I read it and made me feel, much less alone. And I also wrote a piece called Under the Rug about my own OCD journey too. So, that's honestly some of the best ways where you can make those connections and learn from others. But yeah. Oh yes, and Caroline, who's part of Mental Health Union, put the link in the chat. Thanks, Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. One other question in the chat. What advice do you have for parents helping their kids as a parent of a child who has been diagnosed with OCD?
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that a question that definitely needs to be asked. In terms of my own personal experience, I will preface this with the fact that my parents were just like gifts sent from God. I really don't know how I would, have made it out of that experience without them. They never, I think the first step is to never pass judgment on the person. That was my fear, number one big fear when revealing my thoughts to my parents. I thought they would judge me, and I thought they would, like see me as this irrational person. But they never did. Never once did they. And I think that really set the precedent for me being able to share with them and open up with them. And I think in terms of a parent, that's the number one thing you can do. Just, don't pass judgment, because, it's something that's happening in the person's brain. It's very much not something they asked for. No one asked for a mental illness. And it's very scary when you're experiencing it alone. So if you can be that, that shoulder to cry on, that's honestly the biggest gift you can do for someone experiencing OCD, at least from my personal experience. I think the second thing is in terms of compulsions. So with OCD in particular, I think for my parents, of course I'm speaking for them, but it was really hard because they would see me struggle with my intrusive thoughts so much. I would have this certain face on when I would go through this cycle, and they would just my mom would come over and she's like, "Are you thinking?" And, she would just know immediately. And it's really hard to see your child kind of experience those intrusive thoughts, but not being able to reassure them, because, throughout my life, my parents reassured me. And that's what any normal parent would do, right? If you see your child in anxiety, experiencing anxiety, you want to reassure them, you want to resolve that anxiety. But until we found out that it was OCD and, the assurance was a compulsion, it was really hard for my parents to stop and not engage in the compulsion, because one of my biggest compulsions was going to my parents and asking them "Oh, I didn't do this, right? This is not me, right?" And I was really relying on them for compulsions. And so being aware of that, of course, it's different for each person, but being aware of your child's compulsions and how it can take different forms, because compulsions are very manipulative. They can come in many different forms. Even when I'm talking to my therapist is like, "Well, Adithi, I'm not going to answer that because I think that's your OCD talking." So being aware of that, because even though in the moment it's really tough to just see your child in that pain, know that you're actually helping them, because the more compulsions you engage with, the further you're setting them back. So I think just being aware and really, educating yourself about it, because, it's so easy to pass judgment. It's so easy to think that it's, just get over it. And that's something my parents and I experienced too. Of course, none of them could really see the thoughts and feel the thoughts I was having. They only knew what I was communicating to them. But it's always easy on the outside to say it's just a thought, so just get over it. It's why is it so hard for you? Just let it go. It's not that hard, And I myself have those thoughts when I listen to some other people, because of course, I don't have germ OCD. So, I don't really care about, touching things. And of course, as a person, I would just be "Oh, that doesn't matter to me." But for someone, you can't relate to them in terms of the OCD, of course. And that sometimes creates a barrier, but just try your best to be as empathetic as possible. And saying "Don't think this," or "Don't have this worry," or "Don't have this thought," is counterproductive, because it's, we can't control it to many degrees and to many extents. And it's not like you can just exercise every day, physical, health. It's not something you have, it's that straightforward. So recognizing that it's something that's intimately personal. And yeah, that's something my parents are really good at. They never told me "Okay, get over it. Okay, you're done thinking, stop." They never said that, because they realized that, it's not as easy as it seems from the outside. And, no one will ever really know what I experienced, and, only I will. And that goes for everyone. So it's, it's easy to make that assumption. But yeah, those are like the 4 strategies I would recommend, given my experience.
Thank you, Adithi. I think this is the end of the hour. So I, once again, just really want to thank you, Adithi, for sharing your experience. I am so proud of you, and I'm really happy to know you, and I'm so happy I got to have this conversation with you, and I had the honor of like asking your questions. I'm really just in awe at your wisdom and your patience. And I'm sure a lot of people will be learning from you from this event and are very grateful to you for sharing your experiences. Yeah, I'm really just over the moon for you. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, and I just would, if I could just add really quickly, just for anyone who's experiencing OCD or any mental illness, you're not alone. Like, please don't ever try your best not to feel alone, because there's so many people out there that are experiencing similar things to you. And there's always light. There's always a way out. It may take some time, it may take some patience, and some hurdles, but you got this. You can live the life that you want to live. It's very much in your reach, no matter how impossible it may seem right now. That's just something that I'd like to leave you with, because that's something I thought when I was going through it. So yeah.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if we can share maybe the HUM email address, or maybe Aditi's personal email address, or the HUM overall email address, whichever you feel comfortable with. For if anyone has additional questions and would like to reach out. This can be, a really long journey sometimes, and HUM is here to help our community with things just like this. So feel free to reach out. I'm gonna put okay. Well, Adithi put her email in the chat, and there's the HUM email as well. So feel free to reach out to either one of those email addresses. And again, thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you, Adithi, again for the 100th time. I'm just so thankful.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure.
Well, we hope everyone had a great time and has a great night. And we'll see you at future events. Thank you for attending.